Hello, hello, hello. My name is Kira. I like analyzing things and I like Hell of a Boss, so it's great that I get to combine the two. So, I was actually going to weigh in on Stolas a little bit by talking about why Blitz's apology to Fizz worked and his apology to Stolas didn't. Involved actually breaking down the dialogue and analyzing the actual structure of the conversations as well as the preconceived notions all characters had going in. But then I thought about Stolas and decided I needed to talk about him instead because he's got his whole new thing going on. Basically, Stolas is aging backwards, and I think that's a huge part of why he's such a mess right now. Now, let me explain what I actually mean by aging backwards. We know that Stolas didn't receive attention from his father to the point Paimon had to be reminded who Stolas was, and we never learn anything about his mother, which suggests she was out of the picture as well, meaning that Stolas was raised by employees of the Goetia family. Now, not to say that tutors and nannies can't be effective at raising children. Obviously, Stolas turned out very well read and at least mostly responsible when it comes to his task. But Stolas was not raised by a mother or father, and it seems from what we've seen that he learned a lot from books. Now, learning a lot from books has a lot of very good effects. General knowledge, empathy, quite the vocabulary, even if you don't know how to pronounce the words, etc. However, learning about the world via books not only can give an unrealistic expectation about the world, but also suggests isolation, since the books young Stolas was shown to read were quite advanced and would have been read by himself, no nannies or butlers involved. We also know that Blitz was his first friend, so he obviously did not interact with kids his own age often, or at all. Children who are isolated for long periods of time miss out on learning important social skills. Stuff like peer interaction, problem solving, and even expectations of societal behavior can be negatively impacted. As the child grows, normally events like hanging out with friends, going to school with peers, etc. would help the child develop a sense of self and give them an idea of who they want to become. Without these, it's very easy for the child to gain symptoms of depression and anxiety, which can become lifelong problems. Continued isolation has the tendency to make these worse. So, if we just go by the psychology, Stolas was extremely isolated his entire childhood, probably right up until his arranged marriage with Stella, who enjoyed throwing parties and who would lead to Stolas interacting with more people. However, the effects of childhood isolation don't go away just because that isolation might be toned down. Notice how Stolas stood alone at Stella's party and was not shown to socialize the way she did, like with her tea party. This is because he likely had no idea how to approach people, how to hold a casual conversation, or generally what his behavior should be when with peers. So, we have a guy who does not know how to socialize. His marriage to Stella was obviously miserable, even though he attempted to go through the steps, which would not be a natural instinct for him. So, obviously what he needs now is a child. Stolas seemed to be in his early to mid-30s in the show now, judging by how old you think he is in the circus. Octavia is 17, so we can guess that Stolas became a father at a very young age. Even if we say that he's 37 in canon, I personally think he's younger, that would make him a father at 20, which I know some people do have children that early or earlier, but we have to remember Stolas doesn't even have a sense of self due to that aforementioned isolation. This is where it gets interesting for me. Stolas has two very different personalities, one when he is with Octavia and the one where he isn't. Personally, I believe that Stolas with the enhanced empathy he learned from his childhood, would be much more natural at dealing with a child, because Octavia would not have societal expectations of him, requiring things like love and attention, which he was capable of giving completely and fully. Children are also way more likely to lay out exactly what they want or what is bothering them, so it would be easier for Stolas to navigate that territory. If we take the flashbacks from Octavia, we see that Stolas was very gentle, very patient, and likely trying to provide what he realized he never received. As an aside, having two parents in the household, even if one was Stella, would lead to Octavia being more socially adept, though she obviously shows signs of suffering, possible depression, maybe just emo from the whole divorce procedure. But she's doing better than Stolas was. But okay, back to childhood. When Octavia had a nightmare, she clearly stated why she was upset, and Stolas was able to reply in a way that soothed her. Notice, though, as Octavia grew older, Stolas started to fail on the social cues she was sending. It took him quite a long time to notice she was upset while at Lululand, and it was his behavior that led to her actions in seeing stars. Basically, as his child grew older and began to learn the things that Stolas never did, such as how to send and receive social cues, it became more difficult for him to interact with her until she laid out exactly why she was upset. This happens both at Lululand and in Seeing Stars. Despite their relationship not being as strong as it once was, though, I believe that Stolas, again, lacking a sense of self, created a dad persona. And we see it turn on and off depending on whether he is trying to be a father to Octavia. He has remained gentle, patient, understanding, doesn't yell at Octavia for stealing the grimoire, is the loving father from her childhood. So, at around the age of 20, give or take a couple of years, Stolas figured out that he had to be dad, and so constructed a self around that idea. And in those early years of being dad, he was much more capable of reading Octavia's social cues and was generally less isolated, not because of Stella, but because of the positive relationship he had with his daughter. The positive feedback from Octavia would feed into the notion that being dad was a success, and this was most likely the time period Stolas was most in control of his life. He knew who he was supposed to be, and he was interacting with someone who could make up for the ill effects of his childhood isolation. He also had a job to do with the grimoire, giving him a further sense of self. There were some downsides to being dad. Listening to the lyrics from the lullaby, you would think that Stolas was going to die tomorrow. I used to think that I was bold. I used to think that love would be fun. He's in his early to mid-20s here. Now all my stories have been told except for one, meaning Octavia. This mid-20s owl man seriously thinks that his life is over except for the existence of his daughter. That is incredibly bleak and leads to him coming across as overall much more serious. But it was not to remain the same. I talked about how Stolas' relationship with Octavia would grow more difficult, but we can sort of see him going backwards when it comes to actual maturity levels after Blitz re-enters his life. So, 17 years ago, Stolas created his dad self. Dad self had been failing because of Octavia maturing. Stolas was losing who he once was again. Enter Blitz. Stolas relied on his knowledge from books to try to act out some sort of sexual fantasy, knowledge that obviously started to fail him even when Blitz was playing along with Stolas, because Stolas had never experienced the sort of passionate sex he wouldn't have had with Stella. This is the sort of thing he might have gotten during some sort of peer education or just by being out in the world. At the time he was a new dad, but alas he never had that time because he was having his arranged marriage and then being a dad. Here was where we saw Stolas creating his new sort of self, the one he would swap with dad's self accordingly. This self was very centered on Blitz, but also extremely naive and still reliant on fictional sources of romance to guide him, because Stolas will probably remain pretty terrible at reading social cues for a long, long time. And Blitz is not only bad at reading social cues as well, or just ignores them for a but is also very difficult to read. With this new self for Stolas, this sense of newfound freedom due to the exhilaration of the affair, we saw Stolas reverting to more childlike behavior that doesn't belong with responsible dad self, especially because, he didn't gel with Octavia in the same way anymore. So we got stuff like him calling Blitz and murder family, not getting the hint that Blitz is literally running for his life, and then going on and on and on about his sexual fantasies, even after Blitz loses his phone. This is a very clear sign that Stolas has no idea how to hold a conversation, and is also slipping in the area of general communication. Most of us know that if we are going to list sexual acts we want to partake in, there should be some talking about whether both parties are interested. Stolas never learned this because of his general lack of experience with sex, and also no sense of social cues. This lack of learning to listen is demonstrated many times during the Stolas relationship. From something as simple as Blitz telling Stolas to say his name right during the Harvest Festival, to Stolas getting his feelings hurt and leaving the room in full moon, and then teleporting Blitz out of the mansion mid-apology because he cannot handle what is being said anymore. He just never learned that conversation needs to involve everyone, and while I'm not excusing Stolas' behavior, I think this explains a lot. We get the trash fire that was their date at Ozzy's, with Stolas clearly out of his depth the whole time after Blitz insulted his outfit. Like, before then, he was like, hey, I'm here, I'm looking fab, but then Blitz is like, isn't that a bit much? And just wind out of his sails. I think we actually get a bit of dad persona twice in this episode. Once when Ozzy says that Stolas traded his wife and child for a thrust, and also when Blitz dropped him off at the end there. At Ozzy's, Stolas was reminded of his dad's self, the one devoted to his daughter, and I believe that the shame he felt could well have been that dad self of his momentarily overtaking the one with Blitz self. Later, when Blitz drops Stolas off, I think we saw Dad Stolas again, not in a weird way, not like in a daddy way, but he is very gentle and patient when dealing with an irate Blitz. The way he acted with Octavia as a child. He also got the social cue and called Blitz just Blitz, leaning further into the idea that Blitz was being pretty easy to read at that moment, and so something that Stolas could handle because he'd handled that sort of thing before. Besides Ozzy's, we also get that rapid-fire switch between the personas when Stolas is being tortured by Stryker, making sexual jokes about how big Blitz is, and generally mocking Stryker, to immediately becoming dead serious when Octavia is mentioned. No jokes, complete serious Dad Stolas. He really operates on these modes. Alright, so Stolas can swap modes on the turn of a dime. But continuing with Blitz mode, lack of listening isn't the only way Stolas acts immature with this new persona. His behavior at Lululand is very childish. His idea that he should have a cutesy nickname for Blitz is pretty juvenile. The bouncing around when he got the call from Blitz was something you wouldn't expect from someone his age. It would be someone much younger. Like, I'm not saying he reverts to being 5 years old, but he wasn't the calm, patient, loving father that he once was for Octavia. And he didn't exhibit a lot of those traits, including the negative ones like his defeated, very bleak look on life. With Blitz, without Dad's self, he was incapable of reading the situation and then offering an immediate solution, like comforting Via after her nightmare. What he could still do was research. He's very good at that. Very good at reading. He loves words. Hence, the crystal. But he never thought that maybe he should ask Blitz for input on that, instead presented it as a grand gesture like you see in a romance novel. Actually, some of the best examples of Stolas' behavior and even his recognition of it come in Apology Tour. First of all, in All to You, Stolas wondered if part of the relationship failing was due to him not reading things correctly. Which, good job, buddy. You have at least partially recognized that you suck at reading social cues, that you missed signs that make this your fault as well. Also, in this episode, we do see his lack of social skills, being alone at the party until Verosika finds him, not striking up conversation even when it was possible, and then there's his conversation with Blitz. Stolas was drunk, but the way he spoke was very naive, very juvenile, and I think made Blitz realize a lot of the problem. Because what Blitz may have seen as condescension, it really was just Stolas not knowing what he was doing. Yes, due to being raised as royalty, but also due to being raised as royalty, if you get what I mean. He wants a telenovela, which most people in their 30s have realized is not going to happen, but Stolas lacks experience. He also drunkenly tells Blitz in tears that he doesn't want him there, basically to go away. He wasn't listening again. And he was telling his feelings very outright, very much like an upset child, like you would expect from a 5-year-old. Go away, you're making me sad. Someone with a bit more tact would be able to tell Blitz to leave them alone without having to burst into tears about it. Yes, he's drunk, but even sober, Stolas simply lacks the ability to hold a conversation with Blitz that doesn't end with him, usually him just getting what he wants, like in Lululand, the Harvest Festival, resolving an argument with sex and truth seekers, or B, one or both parties leaving the scene of the conversation, like in Ozzy's Full Moon earlier in Apology Tour, and when Better Than Blitz guy comes along. Stolas, in this persona of person I am with Blitz, has really been spoon-fed the idea that he can act in these immature ways. The few times he didn't get what he wanted, namely Eminem coming to rescue him instead of Blitz, he was either rude to them, like in Lululand, or he held it over Blitz's head, like with the striker. When he was acting as Dad Stolas, he was the one understanding the very simple ways Octavia would express what she wanted/needed, and now has regressed to speaking that way himself because it's what he knows. So when I say that Stolas is aging backwards, this is what I mean. Despite having shown the capability to be a father, yet also demonstrating all the behaviors I just mentioned, Stolas is basically going back through his 20s and the teenagehood he never got to have, making bad decisions and forgetting the ways he successfully raised Octavia. Is this a good thing? Well, it's making things interesting. Plus, we throw in the anxiety that's also a symptom of childhood isolation, and yeah, I think it's incredibly fair to talk about how Stolas never really got a childhood or teenagehood, getting assigned the grimoire, having an arranged marriage, and then having a kid at a young age. For people who feel they didn't have a childhood, acting more childishly as they age can be a way of coping with that, especially once they feel free to do so, which Stolas did in his relationship with Blitz, where he was suddenly in control of that aspect of his life with someone who enabled that. I mentioned before that I think Stolas was most in control when Octavia was young, and that was because he was responsible for a young life and molded himself to be able to rise to that challenge. With Blitz, Stolas was suddenly in control of his sexual life, and with the divorce, his bachelor status. But he was not responsible for Blitz. Yes, he saved him in Truth Seekers, but we didn't see either of them taking emotional responsibility for each other, leading to the events of Full Moon, where emotions suddenly erupted and buried Pompeii. Because Blitz is also not the steadiest person. Stolas is building this new self of his on a pretty shaky foundation, as evidenced by the way he sings about how Blitz loving him would get rid of his negative thoughts about himself, which just isn't how it works, hun. Now, I'm not saying that Stolas is this spoiled brat. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I said earlier that children who read a lot tend to be very empathetic, and Stolas has a lot of empathy. It's one of the things I love most about him, which I think is actually best demonstrated in Oops. Stolas went to Ozzy for help, was denied that help, and then spent the rest of his day helping Ozzy get his loved one back. I firmly believe that Stolas knew the truth about Ozzy and Fizz by the end of the whole ordeal, because even if he misses social cues, isn't forbidden love and reunion at the last minute something straight out of a romantic fantasy? That's just his thing. He's probably read about it. Also, there's not reading social cues, and then there's how obvious Ozzy was in that entire episode. Yet Stolas didn't talk about hypocrisy or even look angry or dejected. Once Fizz and Ozzy were together again, Stolas left the room looking smug over the fate of the lawyer. And he wasn't even disappointed that he didn't get the crystal. Despite not being close to either Ozzy or Fizz, in contrast to Fizz being close to Blitz, when, Blitz called those two out for being hypocrites, Stolas demonstrated a huge amount of empathy for people who had done nothing but mock him publicly and then deny his request for the crystal. He has very good traits that don't change no matter what his persona might be. And I think that's important to emphasize. He's got so much empathy. So, what can Stolas do from here? Childhood isolation can have effects that last a lifetime, but he is immortal, so let's hope he can get some help in that time period. Really, what I think needs to happen is Stolas needs to find that sense of self he failed to truly develop. One that isn't a persona, but actually solidified personality where he knows who he is and feels comfortable in it. The complete contrast between Dad Stolas and Stolas with Bliss, I think, demonstrates how Stolas attempts to become some sort of chameleon to his circumstances with varying success rates. Despite being a very young father, he was responsible, mature, caring, one who listened to Octavia's needs and didn't show annoyance at her for needing him. If Stolas is able to remove the labels around these different selves and instead discover a self who can be a conglomeration of all the things he is capable of being, yes, responsible, mature, capable of listening, maybe a bit of a defeatist at times, but also excitable and romantic and kinky and snarky and all the other things he has discovered he can be due to his relationship with Blitz, then I think Stolas would be on his way to actually knowing who he is outside of his status. Outside of his duties, outside of the life that was forced upon him, just himself. Flawed, certainly, but his self alone. And wonderful in many ways. Now, if Stolas doesn't deal with his identity crisis, he and Blitz may never make up. Because when Stolas says things like, paraphrasing, I never talk down to you, I'm never ashamed of being with you, if he's actually missing the reality of how events are going down in the eyes of other people, then he might 100% think he's telling the truth, and those weren't just excuses. So he has a lot of growing to do, basically, a lot of self-reflection, discovering who he is and who he wants to be, and then practice when interacting with other people, to become better at holding conversation, to listening, to socializing, and cueing in on acceptable behavior. He has to undo what was done to him as a child, which is sad, but everyone in this show is miserable for some reason, so I guess this is Stolas' lot. Alright, that's my pitch. I know people are going to be like, oh, he could be autistic or ADHD, because I miss social cues too, and that's fine. I'm not stomping on your headcanons. I want to make that very, very clear. But based on what we have seen from Stolas' childhood to how he acts as an adult and how the cause and effect line up so well, I do think that the trouble with Stolas can completely lie with the isolation he experienced when young. So, think what you want. This is just my take. Not original. Screwed up childhood means screwed up adult. But mostly I just find it fascinating how Stolas has these two selves that he's created that come out at different times. And I can look back on a lot of episodes now with a different point of view. So that was fun. It was fun to do a little dive into a character with a possible new perspective on why he acts the way he does. So that's it. Again, my name is Kira. If you like this video, please like, subscribe. It means a lot to a small channel like me. And I hope you're doing well wherever and whenever you are. I'll see you later. Bye.